Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I hope this webinar is not too close to the lunch break, at least for those of you who are in Europe right now, and that you're willing and able to discuss with me during the next minutes about agenda setting and energy policy in the European Union. I should maybe start by briefly introducing myself. My name is Sophie Biesenbender, and I'm a researcher at a small institute in Berlin dealing with research evaluation and science policy. Before that, I worked as a researcher at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, for 3 years, and then as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Constance in Germany. My research is focused on comparative public policy and European integration, and my interests comprise, in particular, environmental and energy policy, as well as research, technology, and science policy. So this is also why my co-editors, Jale Tosun and Kai Schulte, recently edited a book on energy policy in the European Union. And last week, Jale Tosun gave an introductory presentation to the book and the topic of this lecture series as well. And in this context, she not only summarized the main elements and findings from the contributions to our edited volume, but she also gave an introduction to the issue itself, that is energy policy in the EU. In our book, we confined ourselves to how EU institutions and not member states have dealt with the issue in the course of the last decades. I hope that you all had the opportunity to attend Jale's webinar last Friday. Her presentation was in a way also an introduction to my presentation today. And as I said, I would like to focus on 6 decades of energy policy and agenda setting in the European Union in the field of energy policy. My talk is based on the results of one of the chapters of the edited books. So let me see the next slide. Okay. Well, this presentation is structured like this. I will start out with a brief introduction to the topic by summarizing and repeating some of the key findings presented by Jale last week. I will then try to go through the 4 research questions I pursued during my exploratory analysis. In the second part, the talk is about how the institutional and legal framework conditions have evolved in the EU over the last decades, as far as this has had implications for energy policy making. In the third part, I will present you the results of a descriptive analysis on the development of the energy policy agendas in 2 EU institutions. That is, on the one hand, the European Commission, and on the other one, the Council of the European Union, or the Council of Ministers, or simply the Council. In this context, I would try to draw the broad lines of discussion and decision-making in these 2 European Union institutions, and with regard to different aspects of energy policy. In the fourth part, I will focus on the more recent developments in EU energy policy, that is, the development of a comprehensive EU energy policy. This topic has entered the agendas of different EU institutions at the same time, and I will try to disentangle these processes and show how the agendas have actually been gradually harmonized. Yes, the last section is dedicated to a very short summary and wrap-up. Well, so let us start. What have we learned from last week, and what is particularly worth noticing for today's topic? Jale Tosun concluded last week that overall attention for energy issues has grown in the European Union, and this is probably true, as we will see in the next section. In addition, she mentioned that energy policy is becoming ever more cross-sectional. In other words, it is more closely related to other policy fields, such as environmental policy, which does not come as a surprise, but also, for example, social policy, if you think about the issue of energy poverty. And today's finding will confirm this observation as well. A third general finding is that EU institutions employ different strategies and competing approaches in agenda shaping and issue framing. And as we will see shortly, the results of these 2 analyses to be presented today are also in line with this finding. Just to give you a brief overview of what the guiding questions of my 2 exploratory analyses were in this chapter. Question 1 addressed the nexus between institutional conditions or treaty law and energy agendas and policies. Question 2 dealt with the changes over time in policy agendas and decisions, and research question 3 focused on the effects of the success of agenda shaping. In other words, under what circumstances do institutions actually pass legislation that has been on the agenda or the agenda of other institutions? And the fourth and final question deals with the interplay of EU institutions in agenda shaping or setting. How are institutional agendas or the discussions different institutions harmonized? These are just broad and overarching questions that will help me to structure the results I will present you right now. Before we turn to the results, I would like to give you a broad overview of the changes that have taken place in treaty law over the period of interest. Here you see a table that summarizes the main developments. It divides the period of analysis in 3 different phases. The first one refers to the period of the European coal and steel community and the atomic energy community. The second one takes into consideration the changes brought about by the Single European Act in 1987 and the Treaty of Maastricht or Treaty on European Union in 1992. And the third phase refers to the period since the mid-2000s, which is also characterized by the provisions of the Treaty of Lisbon from 2007. Well, energy issues were part of the policy agenda already at the first steps of the European integration process. The foundation of the European coal and steel community in 1951 and the European Atomic Energy Community 6 years later was to guarantee the supply of energy in this new community of nation states. However, despite this initial significance that was attached to energy issues, actually, attempts to extend the EU policy beyond these 2 treaties were not really made. This was mainly due to primary law that limited the Commission's ability to address energy issues in a broader context. Over the years, the Commission, backed by the European Parliament, made several attempts to modify treaty law, also by including an energy chapter. Well, these attempts repeatedly failed due to resistance by member states that did not want to transfer further competences in energy matters to the EU. So with the Single European Act in 1987, the environmental policy integration principle was included into treaty law, and this change actually allowed EU policymakers to frame energy initiatives as environmental policies. So this principle was further strengthened a few years later in the Treaty of Amsterdam. The Treaty of Maastricht from 1992 underscored the role of energy security and policy for the functioning of the EU, also by specifying that measures in the spheres of energy should constitute priority measures for the community. So since the late 1980s, EU decision makers have been able to couple energy policies objectives with a number of other policy goals. This diversification also increased the importance of agenda shaping as the stage of the policy cycle in which problems are defined and framed. I do not know if you are familiar with this concept, but this is the very start in which we think about problems that should be addressed by policymakers. However, at that time, the EU still lacked a consistent European energy policy. In 2005, then, heads of state gathered at the European Council meeting in Hampton Court, and it was formally agreed to develop a comprehensive European energy policy. So this initiative was followed by the Commission in spring 2006. The Commission published in that year a green paper entitled A European Strategy for Sustainable, Competitive and Secure Energy, in which the Commission proposed concrete measures to concretize a common European energy policy. And these activities also reflected in the Treaty of Lisbon in 2007, which finally provided a more specific frame for these energy policy activities in the EU. So policy making, according to the treaty, should be designed to first support the functioning of energy markets, second to secure energy supply, and third to promote energy efficiency, fourth to support the development of renewable energy sources, and fifth and finally to advance the interconnection of energy networks. So there was a broader mandate for energy policy making with the treaty, which enabled decision makers not only to enact comprehensive regulation of the policy field as a whole, but also to pursue a number of different energy-related policy goals. As we will see, this has led to a lot of activity in this regard in the EU institutions. What we should also mention is there was a further change in the institutional rules that is, however, not specific to the field of energy policy, but in a general measure. Since 2012, European citizens have been given the possibility the right for citizens' initiatives, which was already granted to them by the Treaty of Maastricht and the Treaty of Lisbon. Well, a regulation of the European a regulation of the European Parliament and the Council in 2011 finally implemented this right, and shortly thereafter, in August 2012, a citizens' initiative was started to suspend the European Energy and Climate Change package of 2009. However, this initiative did not fulfill the conditions and finally failed due to insufficient support. Well, after this brief overview of the most important changes in treaty law with regard to energy policy in the EU, we should come back to the actual analysis and the guiding research questions. I just listed them again for you, and what is coming next? Well, in the following, I would like to give you a broad and first overview of the dynamics of agendas and decision-making in two European institutions with regard to energy policy. In my analysis, I counted the number of preparatory documents and legislative documents in these two institutions over time and differentiated by the content and scope. I classified the type of document and the content according to the categories that are offered by the search function of the EU repository of official documents, which is called EUR-LEX, and maybe you're familiar with that. Well, the search options have been adjusted since I did my analysis, but at the time of the analysis, I was able to look at the following dimensions of energy policy. Well, coal, oil and gas, nuclear energy, renewables, general principles, and electricity. In my analysis, I assumed that the degree of decision-making activity for a certain issue is reflected in the number of legislative documents on the different dimensions of energy policy. And in addition to that, the degree of attention paid to addressing certain policy problems can be assessed by the number of preparatory documents on the different topics issued by the EU institution over time. And such an approach has its limitations. Well, strictly the number of documents does not say anything about the content or extent or the discussion or bindingness of the different decisions or topics considered. But if we take such a broad approach and look over such a long time for different institutions, one can broadly or can infer the broad trends and tendencies based on these figures, I would argue. So in the analysis, I did not consider international agreements or treaties or consolidated legislation or case law, but I looked at the preparatory documents which cover, for instance, communications, working documents, proposals for legislation, staff working documents, etc. Legislative documents include, for instance, decisions, directives, and regulations. So now let's turn to the results. The two figures on this slide show how densely energy production from different sources has been addressed in the European Commission over time by showing the cumulative number of documents that were issued for the different topics or contents. As for preparatory acts, activity has been highest with regard to the general principles and programs in energy policy. And since the mid-1980s, as you can see, the energy policy agenda of the Commission has constantly dealt with overall objectives of EU energy policy. Another focus was on the regulation of nuclear energy based on the Euratom Treaty. And in this context, the Commission has repeatedly brought the issue of nuclear energy also to the agenda of the Council, as we will see in a second, by proposing Council decisions or by reporting on past activities in this area of regulation. Well, indeed, several attempts have been made in the Commission also to shape the Council's agenda and to encourage legislation through proposals, draft regulations, and directives. This is also true for the Commission's agenda in the area of oil and gas, as we can see, at least as it concerns the years from 1985 to the mid-1990s. During this period, most of the preparatory acts that the Commission prepared were directed to the Council with a request to address certain issues related to the regulation of oil and gas in the We will see how this has affected the Council's agenda in a second. However, the Commission's agenda is also shaped by the institutional agendas of other EU bodies. Since the mid-1990s, the European Council has increasingly requested the Commission to regulate energy matters by means of delegated action. Well, to sum up, the Commission is the formal agenda shaper for the EU's overall agenda. It has produced high numbers of both preparatory and legislative acts, and this becomes more evident if we compare it to the number of documents issued by the Council. Given the Commission's institutional competencies, there are also high levels of agenda shaping activity since the mid-1980s with new framing approaches due to modifications in treaty law. And overall, attention to general principles and oil and gas has been particularly increasing. The policy priorities are also reflected in the Commission's legislative output or activity with regard to energy policy. And as we saw in the figures, regulation in the area of well, we cannot see it, but I will explain it. Regulation in the area of coal takes mainly the form of approving aids from different member states to the national coal mining industry. And since the turn of the millennium, activity in this area has stopped altogether. Much regulation was also passed in the area of nuclear energy, which is in line with the Commission's agenda. This is mainly in the form of Commission decisions, but also Commission opinions with respect to national policy decisions again. And it's especially since the mid-2000s, the Commission has increasingly become involved in the regulation of general principles and programs in the energy sector. This is also due to the increasing complexity of energy policy, technological progress, obviously, and also the diversification of energy generation. So the findings reflect the complex interrelationship between energy, climate, and environmental policy also in a way. Well, altogether, decision-making competencies of the Commission have increased, but were limited for a long time. As we will see, a number of decisions have been taken and implemented for issues that were, in fact, on the Council's agenda. And differentiation came with the Single European Act in 1987. The European Council has also shaped the Commission's agenda mainly as concerns the general principles of energy policy. We will address this issue in the next part in more detail. So, however, the Commission is also an institution that greatly influences the agenda and decision-making of other institutions, as the example of the Council will show us. Well, and a last aspect concerns the impact of European dependence on energy imports for oil and gas, which is also reflected in the figures I showed earlier. Now let us turn to the performance of the Council of the European Union. Here the picture is different but plausible as well. The figure on the left side shows that attention in the Council has changed over time from 1975 to 1990 about. More or less, the Council mainly published preparatory acts on energy generation based on coal. It issued a number of assents and empowered the Commission to grant support to the European coal industry or to support research in this area. So the Council influenced the Commission's agenda and regulatory activity with regard to energy production from fossil fuels. This picture became more diverse in the beginning of the 1990s, as you can see. Well, the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992 meant a diversification in the Council's approach towards energy policy in the EU. From then, it was more the design of general principles and programs that has become more important and that has influenced the energy debate in the Council until today. As you can see, this is also reflected in different publications of Council positions on a number of issues such as energy networks, energy mix, and the role of different sources in the energy mix. And also energy efficiency has been a topic. Well, in addition, internal market considerations related to electricity and external energy relations, well, this concerns mainly oil and gas, have been repeatedly on the Council's agenda since the mid-1990s. This picture roughly is roughly reflected in the actual regulatory activity in the Council, apart from the Euratom's activities in regulating nuclear energy. The Council has mostly acted to specify the broad lines of energy policies, and energy policy, well, the general principles and programs, if you see on the right-hand side of the slide. If we compare the number of preparatory documents in the Commission and the Council, it is obvious that the Council has limited agenda shaping activities with regard to its own institutional agenda, but it has often decided on issues that were brought on the agenda by the Commission, for instance, with regard to nuclear energy or the general principles of energy. And two issues have received stronger attention since the mid-1980s, that is the regulation of coal, which led to a lot of decision-making in the Commission, and general principles, which entailed decision-making of the Council. This is also partly reflected in the Council's regulatory activity with a focus on general principles and nuclear energy, and moderate decision-making activity with regard to oil and gas. So altogether, the Commission has also been an agenda shaping for the Council. On the other hand, the Council has also delegated great part of decision-making to the Commission, especially with regard to coal. And as with the Commission, we see that agenda shaping and decision-making has been more diverse since the Single European Act in 1987. And furthermore, it has been the case with the Commission as well. The European Council has also shaped the Council's agenda, mainly as concerns the general principles of energy policy. So what have we learned from this brief overview of the agenda shaping and decision making in the Commission and the Council? Well, with regard to the first question, we can say that agendas and with a certain time lag also the regulation and decision making indeed reflect ongoing changes in treaty law. What is furthermore interesting is the role of other institutions in influencing the policy processes in both the Commission and the Council. Research question 2, what does that mean in terms of actually energy policy? Well, let's call it traditional areas like coal and nuclear energy have received relatively constant attention. So we might be tempted to talk about something like path dependence. And in addition, the broad picture of energy policy or its general principles have received ever more attention, which might also be explained by the complexity of the field of energy policy as a horizontal policy field, as I mentioned. Research question 3, how are agendas and policy making actually linked? As already mentioned, the figures reveal an interesting but plausible picture. Regulatory behavior of the Commission tends to lag behind its institutional agenda, while regulatory behavior of the Council tends to directly reflect its institutional agenda. This pattern, in a way, also reflects the division of work between EU institutions. Well, the Commission, as the formal agenda shaper for the EU, requires relatively much time to adjust and modify its legislative proposals before being able to reach a compromise also with other EU institutions that are part of the complex decision-making processes. As to the fourth and last question, the preceding analysis did not yet provide lots of evidence, but I will try to address this issue in the next section. As already mentioned previously, energy has increasingly become a field of its own with strong links to neighboring fields such as environmental, climate, or technological policy since the mid-2000s. This process started with the European Council meeting in 2005 and was codified in the Treaty of Lisbon 2 years later. And since then, the development of a comprehensive European energy policy has been on the agenda of many actors and institutions in the EU. This was also reflected in the figures on the previous slides, which have shown that the general principles of energy policy have increasingly dominated the agenda of both the Commission and the Council. By taking a closer look at what has happened in terms of developing a comprehensive EU energy policy, I hope to get to show you more evidence for research question 4, which asks whether different actors and institutions actually follow separate energy agendas or rather one overarching harmonized agenda. What are the structural determinants for the comprehensive EU energy policy and the initiatives that were taken by the different EU institutions? Well, we have learned from the previous analysis that 4 factors play an important role. First, institutional and legal conditions have always defined the procedure for policy actors. And for example, as a consequence of the environmental policy integration principle, environmental considerations have become a core element of the EU's energy policy agenda. And second, the debates on a comprehensive EU energy policy indeed depend on the institutional framework in which the institutions are embedded. So these structures most likely affect not only the selection of issues to be debated or to come on the EU agenda, but also the timing and the way in which they are framed and eventually addressed. So moreover, they influence agenda shaping patterns also across different EU institutions, I would say. Third, economic and trade-related developments have constantly had an impact on EU energy policy considerations due to the EU's dependence on energy imports that concerns in particular oil and gas. And as a consequence, energy security has increasingly become a priority matter within the EU's overall energy policy approach, especially after the oil crisis of the 1970s, and again so in the context of the recent Russian-Ukrainian crisis. And finally, and related to the previous aspect, well, there's also the deterioration of the environment, which is caused also by human beings and the climate, and also the this deterioration has an ever-growing it's created an ever-growing need to adjust in energy policies and to also support technological innovation. And as a consequence, the issue of energy efficiency and renewable energies have become crucial components in the EU's energy policy. These developments show the increasingly complex nature of the field of energy policy. The European Council, the Commission, and also the European Parliament have all started initiatives to shape the agenda for the development of a comprehensive EU energy policy. And after the European Council meeting in 2005, which I already mentioned, the European Commission published its Green Paper on a European strategy for sustainable, competitive, and secure energy. That was in March 2006. And this document essentially opened up the debate, the interinstitutional debate on the formulation of a comprehensive EU energy policy. And at the same time, the European Parliament debated its own initiative, which was entitled a European Strategy for Sustainable, Competitive and Secure Energy. The EP subsequently passed a resolution in December 2006, and the goal of this initiative was to harmonize the policy agendas across institutions by proposing a common and harmonized approach. Essentially, the European Parliament in this initiative reinforced the Commission's objectives by also stressing the need for a comprehensive approach. So we can say there was consensus across institutions about the need for such a comprehensive policy approach. On the next two slides, I will briefly summarize the factors that has affected the process of agenda shaping and strategic positioning of different actors. So shortly after the initiatives by the Commission and the European Parliament, the newly emerging gas dispute between Russia and the Ukraine led to the crisis of January 2006 and the subsequent gas shortages. I don't know if you remember that. Well, the EU, depending on Russian gas and 40% share of total imports, the tensions raised questions regarding energy security and strategic policy responses as well. And well, in policy analysis, we call this focusing events. Well, these tensions or focusing events obviously shape the general debate not only by demonstrating the need to agree on a common energy policy, but also by showing options for a future policy strategy in this context. Shortly after that, in January 2007, the Commission published yet another paper, a communication to the European institutions, which was entitled An Energy Policy for Europe. And this document not only summarized the current situation in the EU, but most importantly also specified avenues for future strategic policy making. And interestingly, the Commission's action plan put particular emphasis on the realization of the internal market as the key target to solve most of the current policy challenges and to address concerns of energy security as well. So what happened next? The European Council met again in spring 2007, and in this meeting particular emphasis was put on linking the issues of climate and energy policy. Well, the debate was in fact guided by the aim to simultaneously address energy and climate change challenges. The commitments of the European Council included a reduction of overall greenhouse gas emissions in the EU by 20% by the year 2020 compared to 1990. And moreover, energy efficiency should be increased by 20% until 2020 in relation to the previous estimates. And then finally, the share of renewable energy of the total energy consumption should be extended by 20%. So in order to implement these targets, the 2020 targets, the resulting Energy Action Plan of March 2007 was passed by the European Council, and it contained a number of measures for European institutions, but also nation states. The Commission took these initiatives to develop the energy and climate change package, which I already mentioned, and based also on the input by the European Parliament, this package comprised a directive on the promotion of energy from renewable sources, further a directive to reform the EU emission trading system, a decision to meet the community's commitments for greenhouse gas emission reduction, and a regulation to limit CO2 emissions from passenger cars. To briefly sum up, the process shows that framing has become more diverse and an important aspect in the agenda shaping and decision-making processes. After the European Council had put energy policy on the overarching policy agenda of the EU, the Commission tried to identify key and priority areas and to define the problems as essentially internal market problems and to propose concrete policy solutions. The European Parliament has played a slightly different role in this process, which I would like to briefly summarize the next two slides. It has been argued in the literature that the committee structure of the European Parliament favors the specialization in different policy areas and at the same time also prevents horizontal policy coordination. Well, this specialization is reflected in the committee structure of the European Parliament, with during that time there were two committees dealing with the issue: the Industry, Research and Energy Committee on the one hand, and the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee on the other hand. And with regard to energy policy, the European Parliament has maintained its focus on the regulation of renewable energy and environmental implications of energy. So it drafted preparatory acts for the energy and climate change package with regard to renewable energy, and by also involving both committees with regard to the different aspects of the topic. So by this, let's call it maybe division of labor, the European Parliament managed to build on its specializations to shape the overall agenda and discussions on the development of a comprehensive EU energy policy, but also stressing the importance of renewable energy, in addition to the common market paradigm, which was strongly advocated by the European Commission. And in that way, the European Parliament managed to maintain its own policy agenda throughout the process. If we look back to research question 4, this brief case study reveals a few findings. Well, given the EU's institutional rules, the high politics route means high politics route means that the agenda is very often set by the European Council or the heads of state. This is true, but these initiatives are usually sufficiently broad to leave enough room for other institutions like the Commission or the Parliament to put forward their own agendas. So both the Commission and the European Parliament have made use of this possibility, given their own or respective institutional constraints and possibilities. The Commission has put its focus on the internal market, and the European Parliament has made sure that the issue of renewable energy receives sufficient attention. We have also seen that institutional agendas are harmonized over time, especially during the problem definition and decision-making processes. But I think this is a necessary condition for the subsequent decision-making indeed to be successful. The last slide summarizes today's findings. Firstly, it is hard to disentangle the processes of agenda shaping and decision-making in the complex institutional structures like we have in the European Union. And secondly, we found evidence that the different factors are indeed important in these processes. We had a few examples for the different factors. Thirdly and finally, institutional agendas become more and more harmonized the closer it comes to the concrete decision-making stages. And if you would like to read more about this topic, I recommend the edited volume I was mentioning at the beginning of this presentation. Part 1 offers 2 further chapters on the patterns of agenda shaping and decision-making that are worth reading. The first one dealing with focusing on the European Council and its role in agenda dynamics, and the second one focusing on